welcome to another episode of What's Going On with Shaun, a variety podcast grounded in marketing, but with an appetite for quality conversations about things that make life worth living. Time is precious, so thanks for tuning in today as we find out what's going on with Bill Playford. Welcome to What's Going On with Shaun.
What's going on, Shaun?
How are you, man? I'm good. This is long overdue, I think. Should have had you on when I was trying to figure all this stuff out around podcasting, kind of in the, I guess, a little bit before the pandemic, but certainly once that started rolling, it was a good thing to train myself on. Mm-hmm. We'll get to that. I'm foreshadowing some things I want to talk to you about. So to the audience, if you're tuning in as a listener or a viewer or both, Bill Playford is not a spring chicken, and he's not new to the auto industry. He's a friend. Most people that get to be on this show are people that are friends. But this happens to be somebody who has a depth of knowledge and experience that, in my opinion, this is my opinion, Bill, is in need of being shared even more. And so I really hope that not only you, the listener and the viewer on this, enjoy it yourself, but that you'll tell people about this episode and let people know Bill is a tremendous resource that could potentially help you with things analytically and from a data analysis perspective that maybe you don't think about very often. Because Bill, that's one of the things that I always think about. You and I used to have some of the most interesting conversations in the trilogy days around it was just a different approach to the way that everyone else, it always felt kind of counterculture, but it was smart, it was intelligent, it was thoughtful, and it was beyond just typical lead addiction. It was really getting into the depths. So first thing I just want to ask you to share a little bit with the audience is just a little bit of your history. I know you're a founder and one of the executives with Dealerknows, and everybody I think knows your partner Joe. But your depth of experience goes really, really deep, and I'd love it if you would just kind of touch on that all the way back to maybe when you got into automotive, and maybe what made you get into automotive.
Well, that's quite the intro, first off, so thank you for that. It all started with being a football star at Polk High, like Al Bundy. No, I'm just kidding. So I like to tell people I got involved in automotive just like everybody else. I was in grad school. I worked at a venture capital firm, and I thought, hey, like this .com stuff is a good idea. Maybe I should go into the car business. And I joke because I don't think anybody actually chooses to go into retail automotive unless your name is on a building. It's one of those things that you kind of either stumble into it, or in my case, I feel like it almost like found you and kind of pulled you in. And so during the aforementioned .com bubble bursting, I always wanted to sell cars online. Like the whole time I was thinking about, like, man, everybody I know has never had a great car buying purchase experience. And I grew up in a General Motors household. My grandfather worked for GM. I can still get GMS if I can track down his wife, wherever she is. It's not my grandma. It might cause some family friction. But everybody I knew in my family never had a great buying experience. And as I got older, and especially as I was in grad school, my friends were quite a bit older. They didn't have good car buying experiences either. There was always some kind of, something. It was a trade. It was picking out the color. It was a salesperson. It was a sales manager. It was cologne. It was cigarettes. It was all those stereotypical things and more. And sometimes it's people more sensitive than others. But I think as a whole, like I didn't really know anybody, whether they had bought a Chevy or a BMW. They didn't have a great car buying experience. And so I thought, well, we're funding all these companies to sell things online. Why can't we sell cars online? And so that kind of stuck with me. And so after about a year or so of kicking around after September 11th, that really screwed the economy, for those of you guys who remember that. I decided, you know what, I'm going to try selling cars on the internet. And so that's what I did for the better part of 5 years, and did that actually a good chunk of the country. Actually didn't know what adventure I was embarking on. But I actually was fortunate enough to stumble upon a dealership that was like one of the pioneers of actually doing online transactions long before we had quote unquote DR tools. or the manufacturers forced dealerships to take said DR tools. And that really gave me a really unique experience in terms of just not only learning how to sell cars, but building relationships and using technology, developing technology. A lot of stuff, when Shaun and I and guys kind of in our generation, like we kind of had to invent things. It wasn't something where you went shopping around, you went to NEDA and made a couple phone calls. It's like you had to make it yourself. And so that's really kind of right before I met Shaun. I got involved with building a lead scoring technology at my dealership. So we actually had built our own technology and had a high school kid, a college kid, and the finance manager's wife, and they helped do all the data and entry and stuff like that. And we actually had built a model at my dealership where we maybe cut acquisition costs by about 70% without having any kind of annualized impact on sales. So it was just a lot less noise, a lot less time wasted on things, but I felt, if anything, it made my coworkers happier to some degree. I mean, I guess you'd have to find them and ask them, but it just was a lot less stress having to like track down people and, get a bunch of bad credit scores or get cars you couldn't sell. I mean, it's the whole gamut of things. And so after helping AutoNation launch AutoNation Direct and them having the pilot to sell their cars online, I went back to the lead scoring and helped develop smart leads. And that's where I met Shaun. So we actually had helped develop, I worked with dealerships. We had developed a lot of technology in terms of how to best acquire third-party leads. And we actually guaranteed a closing ratio. And seeing what third-party leads generate today, we should go back into that because it's not good. But I got into training in the consulting side, literally just because I learned that no matter how great the technology was or how great things could happen ahead of the last mile of the dealership, it still is incumbent upon a salesperson to make it happen. And that's something I still feel like today. And I've even talked about recently in other interviews, but that's today especially, that's important because we got a lot of fantastic technology available and a lot of great tools. And there's a lot of, whiz bang stuff that doesn't work either, a lot of vaporware out there, but nevertheless, it really is up to an individual and how their day is going and how well they're going to interface with that technology and really extract the value out of it. So, doing this stuff with Trilogy and, feeling like I had alien grade technology, I could not get people to pick up the phone. I could not get people to stop just rejecting leads that were perfectly valid. I would actually call rejected leads and say hey, did anybody reach out to you? No, I never heard from anybody. I'd be like, really? So, and so that got me into that training and consulting side of the business where I've been for roughly 14 years now, I think. So I've been doing that full time and I've got to do a lot of really cool engagements with companies since then, but mostly working with dealerships across North America, whether they're mom and dad stores or publicly traded auto groups. I think we've really separated ourselves or differentiated ourselves in the fact that we really work with anybody and help them maximize the resources they have available. So it's not about going out buying things or hiring people or use this tool versus that tool. Like those are all business decisions that they can make. Like we just want to help them get the most out of what they got.
Yeah. Which I love that approach and a lot of things that you shared. I will not uncover all of the leads that you just buried, but how astonished are you that after all these years from the lead scoring days, when, you dropped a statistic in there, 70%, reduction, cleanup, right? That we didn't even really make a dent. And someone could go back into that very type of business right now, and it would almost be as if we're pretty much in the exact same place as we were in 2008 or not, Yeah. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on why do you think that is? Because it seems like one of the biggest areas that would have such a huge impact on the retail side for the dealers, but it's always been such a hard rock to push all the way up the mountain. Why do you think that is?
Man, I think if you would have asked me that question at 5-year intervals, I probably would have told you something different every time. But honestly, I think as you ask me that now, not considering it, I really think it is a matter of attitudes, behaviors, things that were sort of indoctrinated early on. I think there has been an attitude, and I think you would probably agree with me. Like there's just been an attitude is more is better, and we've both been in many dealerships where like, oh, leads are down, let's just forget everything we just tried to implement and go back to, or let's hire a bunch more people. Let's crash the floor and somehow that's going to fix the economy or something. And we can laugh about it, but that happens quite a bit. And unfortunately, that addiction got started early. And, some dealerships even to this day are very efficient. They're very, very miserly when it comes to lead acquisition and they hold people accountable. But for the most part, there's always like that tip of the spear, right? Who does everything or most things right. But then there's like kind of like the other 98%, but this idea of like more is better and we just need more leads. We just need more leads. And I think that's what allows all this stuff to perpetuate. And, I learned, long ago, even though I think my, studies in social sciences for undergrad aren't that valuable. Like one of the things I did learn is really how the economy works. and the understanding is really like, there's only a certain amount of people who are going to be buying a car, at any given time. And it's 2%. I've even asked people working for the Federal Reserve, up to that level, and they agree. It's like 2% of the market is in the market, actually wanting to buy a car and doing the research and talking to dealerships and so on and so forth. And you think about that, how that extrapolates out. So if you're in a city you live in, I don't know if you live in Dallas or you're living in Dallas much longer, but you figure that's, if you combine the whole Metroplex together, that's bigger than Chicago now. It's like what, 8 million people? 9 million people, in that vicinity and growing rapidly. That's a whole lot of cars that can be sold at any given time, but if you're living in a city where there's 20,000, 30,000 people, well, that 2%, that's people buying Chevys, Nissans, Hyundais, Kias, used cars. I mean, like you start to these like small fractions of fractions. And that's, I think today, if you want to test it or look at it, just look at the amount of redundancy and leads you get, how many duplicates you get that aren't from your DR tool, but from just the lead sources you have. There's a tremendous amount of duplication that takes place when people try to use this spray and pray methodology, thinking that they just need more leads. Or my favorite thing I hear is that we got to keep people busy.
What does that even mean? See, this is going exactly as I thought it would. It'd be like you and I picking up on a conversation that we've had, in the mid 2000s. And I really hope the audience is picking up on some of these things, because there's so much more discussion that needs to be had around what you're grounding everybody, the audience, in on the numbers game, right? The reality of, and I'm mostly in B2B marketing now. Any marketing stuff that I talk to dealers about for their business now is usually just dealer friends. Always happy to help. But it's something that I think about all the time on B2B, and I try to help business owners, especially if they're deeply niched in our vertical in automotive. It's like that 2% at any one given time is 2% of the market looking for your service as a CRM company or a DMS. And in most cases in B2B, it's less than 2%. Actually, like maybe 1% are actually looking. So how do you build your strategies and how do you make decisions once you start to think about the math? It should dictate some different behavior. But in the case of dealers, and I hope dealers, that it's not too late, as long as there's people like you and I that are still willing to carry the torch around in the dark, maybe some of them will realize, man, we do have an addiction problem. I've said this for the last several years. The lead addiction problem started before most dealers even had websites, because they got addicted to Stone Age or Auto by Tel, Microsoft CarPoint, like all those early lead providers would just flood the dealership's fax machines and like, here you go. Here's all these new internet leads. And it was like, and if you're a business like a car dealership that you're living off of sales opportunities or leads, it all of a sudden felt like wow, there's a magic gumball machine. All we have to have is enough quarters to pump or pennies to pump in this thing, and we'll keep getting stuff out. And nobody spends enough time realizing some of the things or meditating on what you're talking about, which is the numbers game also has a lot to do with, well, you've got, a handful of very popular known third-party sources where you can acquire leads to supplement maybe what you do with your own marketing efforts. But there's a lot of duplication within that. Why?
Yeah.
Because those people are all swimming in the exact same pond, and they might go to both 2, 3, or more of those sites and fill out information. And before you know it, you're wondering why the quality of your leads and the closing rate of your leads has gone down. And then here's Bill Playford and Shaun Rains talking about the history of, well, remember when you could actually score these leads, and we actually came up with methodologies to actually cut out all the garbage, and you still wouldn't even call the ones that were of high quality. It's still a huge opportunity. So this helps me segue a little bit, although I don't want to cut you off if you had an additional add-on thought on that.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that behavioral side up, though, honestly, because that's something that I learned a long time ago, in kind of bridging this conversation with marketing and sales, but just really focusing on like who your core customer is. And I think maybe that was the advantage of me coming out of doing a lot of due diligence on startups, and whether they were pharmaceutical companies or whatever we were looking at. But those techniques still actually propelled me forward. And what I had understood a long time ago was that, hey, there's only a certain amount of population that actually wants to buy a car online. So let's understand who those people are instead of just trying to carpet bomb everybody.
Yep.
And I was very fortunate. I was blessed to work with a dealer principal who was, very progressive and let me do these things. And it's like, okay, well, hey, let's focus on the customer, and then let's also expand out the types of vehicles we can sell. And so we fold, being able to essentially keep that customer was our goal. So our customer retention rate was pretty close to 90% the whole time I was there, and that's people back when people bought cars every, 27 months or, 40 months or whatever. So we could actually see things that wasn't quite like it is today. But that was one of the things that I felt like really made like the AutoNation Direct really a great pilot, is the fact that we could use the lead scoring technology in conjunction with, the availability of vehicles we had. But I mean, we really could hyper target to people who really wanted to buy online, to where we were getting like, upwards of 20% closing ratios in most zip codes using third-party leads. And like one zip code, we did over 40%, 43% or something like that. And, it's a bit of a unicorn anomaly, but I mean, we had it dialed in. We understood the behavior. We understood the demand and people who wanted to take advantage of this service. And that's what made it so efficient, is the fact that we weren't having to just shoot it out to everybody and then just, try to sift out the value every single month. So it was a really good formula we'd built.
I mean, just imagine cutting 70% of your waste and it having literally no disruptive effect or negative effect on your sales throughput. I mean, it's like, and this literally is, I wouldn't even want to guess, because I think we'd be disappointed on how large the percentage of dealers that really need to spend time in this area to improve. But it is one of great improvement. You already mentioned it. You've been spending now this latter half and a big portion of your career around consulting and coaching and teaching and instructing dealers on all these things. And until I think the cows come home, whatever that really means, you'll probably still be doing it as long as you want to be, quite honestly.
So you need to put a little animation of like the franchise laws and the cows, because they're like the same. So.
Yeah, right. Oh my goodness. Well, let me I'm going to pivot a little bit, but not too much. And I'm going to just go off of the fact that you're wearing a shirt. Your dealer knows. I can tell by that little logo there. This goes back to, so last year, you and Joe decided to get into events. And so you guys did something that at least everybody that I know that participated was like, it was literally the most refreshingly different type of automotive educational event that they had ever attended. And you guys are, I believe, doing this again. It's coming up here in just a couple of months. And so I just wanted to ask you a little bit about that. What inspired the ideas for summer camp? What are your takeaways thus far, and kind of what are you guys looking forward to as you guys get closer to your second summer camp event?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked, because it literally was like over a decade of discussion and just constant tweaking and planning and coming back to it. And I think that, anybody that says they want to open a restaurant and your friends, you're like, that's a dumb idea. It's sort of like having your own event, it's but I always feel like, I always have this thing I always say to like my kids in particular, but you could be part of the problem or be part of the solution. And ironically enough, you and I, went at a conference, and things were quite a bit different, all those years ago, and there were a lot fewer conferences. And people hadn't really figured out how to monetize the conferences. They weren't these giant, behemoth events. And I went to NADA this year. I try to go every 2-3 years. I don't go every year. I'm not a masochist like that, but for me, and for a lot of people I know, that part of why they don't want to go is because of it's just too much. It's too expensive. It's too time consuming. There's a lot of time spent not actually getting your money's worth out of it. You know what I mean? And it's one thing, it's not to besmirch into conferences at all. Like I said, I think you go to certain conferences, you got a certain agenda. There's certain people you want to see speak. Everybody gets to apply their own value to what that is. It's still United States, so we can do that. But generally speaking, I just felt like there needed to be a little bit of an alternative. Joe and I, Joe in particular, has spoken, dozens and dozens of times. I mean, for years, you guys spoke together. You toured the country together, doing your own thing. I mean, you spoke at all the same conferences, and we noticed that the crowd participation and just the networking and all those things that used to be there just is slowly diminishing. I feel really bad for people today, because when you and I did this stuff years and years ago, we'd go shoot the shit afterwards. You know what I mean? We would as you do your presentation and then you hang out, and everybody got to hang out, and everybody was very generous and was happy to share tactics and tricks. And and I have those relationships and that network to this day. And like for you, I 2-3 years could go by. I could call you up and you pick up the call, and I could answer a question, or I could ask a question. And there's a lot of people like that, that we know in this industry. And I feel bad that people don't have that opportunity anymore. I feel like it's just less than. Not to mention that just the cost has gone up geometrically to go to these things. So we decided that, we've kicked on this idea, and we want to do something really memorable, something kind of wholesome, something that's a little nostalgic. I go to camp every summer with my two boys. We're at 3 boys now. I mean, they're all in scouts, and so we do that. And so I've been going to summer camp for years with them, and we've always been trying to incorporate this idea. And so we finally aligned all the stars to find a place that would let us rent this camp, a whole campsite that we can go to. And it's not $1 million, and it's a cheap flight for pretty much everybody in the U.S. And we can get the accommodations, where we could just block out an entire property for everybody to stay at. And so it all worked out well. And I got to tell you, man, it was, for all the stress, after a couple hours into it, I just looked out and I was like, this is beyond my wildest dreams. What could have happened? Just people talking, vendors talking to dealers and dealers talking, just OEMs talking. I mean, just all the people there. It doesn't matter what their background was, or how long they've been in the business, or how short they've been in the business, or what their, personal life is like, or whatever. People just were talking and hanging out and laughing and learning and signing up business and all those things. And it's everything that I wanted to be and more happened within a matter of a few hours. You know what I mean? It was just I'm like, this is going to be a complete shit show. When it started, I had all the worst pessimistic feelings, and it's remarkable. And what was more remarkable is just to see people that got to know each other at camp, and then at NADA, and they're hugging each other and joking and laughing. And I just feel like that was really cool to be part of that, being able to facilitate that.
Very interesting. I'm glad you shared all that. It's just listening to you makes me appreciate the camaraderie, and I think community and culture, both those words get really abused quite a bit, because people they think they know what they're talking about, then they don't. But when I listen to you share the inspiration and then what you've noticed kind of manifest out of all of your efforts, it makes me think about like meeting people like you when you and I first become friends in the industry, and it's because it's meaningful. It feels like there's a more significant weight in the quality of the relationships and the time you spend together. And I do see, because I've experienced this myself, not saying anything about any particular event or events or community gatherings within our industry, but there's so much of it now that it feels infiltrated by things that are attention starved, like people and organizations that cannot seem to get enough of themselves. So it's like they're constantly looking in the mirror, drowning in Lake Me, as I say it. There's a lot of people in our industry that have fallen victim to themselves in the pursuit of really, maybe it's the building up of their personal brand or whatever label but it's in that category, where people have a lot more style than they have substance, and then it poisons some of the things that used to be perhaps maybe a more simple infrastructure that allows for the things that seemingly looks like and sounds like what you guys wanted to do, or at least part of it with your summer camp event. So that's cool. I'm going to ask you a little bit more about that maybe later in the episode.
It's your show, Shaun. You do what you want to do. Okay?
Say that again.
I said it's your show. Your show. You can do what you want to do.
Yeah, that's true. I guess I can. I'm not asking you anything about it. So,
I have to write eye contact with you this whole time. No.
So for the audience, one of the things that if you haven't checked out, I will highly recommend that you go find Bill on LinkedIn and that you follow him and that you go back and look at the content that he has posted there. Specifically, Bill writes a lot, and Bill isn't the kind of person that likes to let ChatGPT or Claude or any other service do his writing for him. He's one of those purists that has a thought that typically festers for a bit, keeps him up at night, steals enough sleep where he's like, okay, should I talk about it? I don't know if I should. He will typically then maybe go to his most trusted people in the inner circle and say, hey, would you check this out? What do you think? And then everyone says, yes, please push it out there. So that's my endorsement to say, go and read these things. And some of the questions that I'm going to ask now are relative to a multi-part series that you did around BDC. And the first thing I just want you to share a little bit about, because you kind of mentioned this, is, you had kind of maybe a initial skepticism and then kind of an eventual realization about the value of BDCs, maybe in a different way in the modern sales environment. Could you share a little bit about like that, from kind of skepticism to, okay, now I see this a little bit differently?
Oh yeah, I think when I was in retail in particular, the idea of BDC was just sort of having a moment, and this is probably like 2006, maybe 2005, 2006. And I think like anything else, it kind of starts on the coasts and kind of moves its way in. And I remember we had a gal come in, and I'm like, well, she's not touching my effing leads, like no way, And
Right.
But I look at like the team that we had and the process we had, and we really, as a whole, had a very, very strong process, especially by today's standards. And so we had it on lock, the idea was sort of, she would just sort of be like a backstop. And then it was like, well, she's gonna make your first call. I'm like, okay, no, time out, end the conversation. You know what I mean? But kind of, having the benefit now of, really close to 1,000 dealerships I've worked with over the years. It's a pretty good sample size. Not all dealerships, but I think I've kind of run the spectrum in terms of types of dealerships. I come to realize that not everybody has got that kind of process, and they might have a process, but it's not practiced. And they may have salespeople who just go in and take leads like they're cookies from the cookie jar. Like there's a whole gamut of things that happen. But I also concluded, rather quickly though, that if you look at like the amount of time spent on a showroom floor, like the guys at Next Up have got good statistics on this and stuff like that. But I mean, if you have a closing, 20% closing ratio, let's say, right? Like that's kind of been industry standard for a while. 25, let's say 25%. You're there 10 hours a day. That's 2.5 cars, 2 cars sold. That's it. That's it. 20% closing ratio. That's the amount of time that's actually being monetized. And then the rest is sort of filler. And yeah, you're gonna make some calls to customers. You're gonna try to do some scratching at the ground, see what comes up. But I mean, the bottom line is that there's a lot of wasted time that happens on the showroom. On the opposite side of the coin, though, is that a showroom, somebody who's in charge of the showroom has to interface with people. I mean, they have, like, if somebody opens the door, you got to greet them. You have to go up there and take care of people a lot. And so the point is that it's not predictable. You don't know when those things are going to happen. And so just by virtue of those expectations alone, you can't be expected to do everything perfect with a lead. You can't. It's just, you can't do two things at the exact same time. You could try, but they're going to be really half-assed. One's going to suffer. But a lot of times we're just expecting people to do things perfectly when circumstantially they can't. On a Saturday morning, most dealerships are busy. On a Saturday, throughout the whole day, like, are they going to be able to get to the leads in the same amount of time as somebody whose job it is to do? Like, that's their sole focus.
Yeah.
And that's where it comes down to looking at just from that standpoint. Like, if you need some dedicated people just to focus on those things, because the expectations are the same. When you and I started selling cars online, years and years and years ago, like, it was a glorious thing. Like, oh my gosh, like you're actually calling me back. You're a real person. You're not somebody in, right, Sri Lanka or something or whatever. And like, people were so excited to hear from us, and we could have these, like, stupid number of closing ratio situations because people were just completely bought in. But demographically speaking, at the same time, like, they were the first people to get a PC and the first people to get broadband, and like, we had a really good group of people. Well, now we have computers in our pocket. We have since 2008, and none of it's new, none of it's refreshing. And most people we talk to today inside of dealerships, this is not their first rodeo when it comes to being online. Like, even if they didn't submit a lead, they've probably done it 5, 6, 7, 10 times, whatever. Yeah, pissed off all those times, and and they're a little guarded. So we have to look at those behaviors and look at just the time factor and kind of realize, like, hey, we need folks to just focus on this stuff. And, once they cultivate that conversation, they get that engagement, they get some level of inertia, well, then we can turn it over to the sales room, the sales floor, the salespeople or what have you, and, set the appointments or do those things, but at least it can balance the expectations. Yeah. So I think most people today have, regularly buy things on the internet. I'm sure there's pockets of, Amish communities, whatever, like, but for the most part, people are, if you're watching this podcast, chances are you're probably an Amazon Prime user. But our expectations change constantly, and our buying behavior is 100% informed by our, previous transactions. Something, we buy a car every 6, 7, 8, 10 years, whatever. We're going to look back on that experience and how good it was or how positive it was, but then we're going to also compare it to the thousands of other transactions we had in between. And that's going to really shape our expectation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting points. It's just this latter half of what you're sharing makes me realize, Amazon, probably more than any other business, has actually tailored and taught all of us how we prefer to kind of shop online, and how to tease out things that are really based on the science of selling, of urgency, and all that type of,
like,
scarcity. And
1 hour till prime delivery tomorrow. They got all those things.
Exactly. It's very interesting. One of the things that I picked up in those articles, and again, I just want to really highly recommend to people to go and read all of them, because we won't have enough time in this episode to touch on all of what's in there. There's just a lot of gold in the ground on those episodes. But I felt like in a way you were it was like a call for an evolution within structure, really, inside like the stores. But like, you kind of spoke to like a misallocation of resources inside the dealership, where it makes it difficult for management to truly understand, well, who's really contributing to the success of the dealership in ways. And I felt like that was like you were kind of challenging in a good way, but challenging the industry to kind of evolve with some of this stuff. Any additional thoughts on that? And was I picking up on that correctly?
Well, actually, I'd written a piece years and years and years ago in defense of managers, honestly, because there's a lot of managers that just got too much responsibility. You know what I mean? Like they don't have time to be in the CRM or watch the metrics or even establish, some sort of, key results they can track that are objective. Like, so even if they have all the leadership skills and all the knowledge and all the education and all the best qualities that we want, like they're just overworked. You know what I mean? They're crashing deals. They're trying to prop up the showroom. They're trying to prop up the GM. Sometimes like they're trying to make, marketing decisions. They're trying to do a lot of things. And I think one of the things I've noticed, and I'd be curious to know what the audience thinks about this or what their experience is, but as we've seen this increase of consolidation, it's like more like the regional level. So not like your AutoNations or Lithias of the world, but like the smaller dealer groups now having 7, 8, 10 stores. I found that management level at the middle, it's really gotten stretched thin. And it's so in defense of all the managers out there that are working their asses off, like they're doing the best they can, but on the flip side of that too, I think it's a matter of how are we allocating our job assignments, our job descriptions, and I feel like that's one of those things where no matter what the silo is inside the dealership, we're just taking like 100 pounds of stuff and trying to 2-pound sack. Sorry for the noise in the background if it came through, but
can't even hear it.
It's my calendar going crazy. But I think that's one of those things where we have to really take a hard look at that. And a lot of times maybe people do, they're like, oh, F that. It's just too much. I get overwhelmed. But I mean, the issue is that the expectations we have for people are just too much. And I think it's a matter of like we have to look at things like they looked at things like in the Industrial Revolution of going like, okay, let's divide the labor down. Instead of having a bunch of craftspeople, hand make a screw, with a, whatever they do or whatever, like how do we stamp those things out by 1,000 and like how to make it easy for the workers to stamp them out by 1,000 or however that goes. And I think we have to take a really hard look in terms of how dealerships are structured from an org chart to really get through a lot of these things that we've been asking for or begging for or scratching our heads about. I think a big part of that is just understanding that division of labor and trying to force people into jobs that either don't exist or are constantly changing and not defined. Or I think in a lot of people's experience, like you just cannot find the talent to do those things. It's just not available anymore to us. So I think that's, one of the major things that was rattling around in my head when I wrote that. And like I said, I really feel like it's easy to blame the BDC. But I think when anyone really sits down and looks at like the objective measurements, I think it's pretty clear that you can demonstrate the BDC is the most scrutinized and probably the most productive department inside the dealership at the same time, because it's a very narrow focus of what they can do, what they're allowed to do in a lot of respects. But I think at the same time, it's very easy to point to that and go, man, like they're the most efficient group in this building because they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Yeah. And I think if everybody had that same level of scrutiny and the same availability of empirical metrics, like time, or just things like that can't be fudged or, subjective. I think if you looked at those things, you'd probably realize like we're paying for a lot of stuff we shouldn't be paying for.
That's a great point. Last thing around the BDC stuff that I want to get your thoughts on before I switch over to a little bit different topic. Again, in both the articles, and if I didn't say this for the audience, it's 2 parts, I believe, on that BDC one. It's probably getting a couple years old, maybe.
It's a few years old, yeah.
But it's still so relevant. But you also make points about ROI within your human resources. You make points about like sunk costs of basically mismanaging your human resources department, which I think kind of sets up like a for dealers, and maybe this will be stuff you even talk about at summer camp, but maybe even a new consideration of blueprint for staffing. Because right now dealers are struggling through that. Our clients are talking about that too, where there's the salesperson inside the dealership today doesn't look like the one that was there even 5 years ago, but certainly not 10 or 20 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
Training is still an issue. Turnover is still an issue. Consistency of process, or even having a process, still an issue. And you mentioned some things like, I think, like a person that collects relationships, and I just want to get your thoughts on that, around the value, that investment in human resources, how that can really turn you in the wrong direction if you mismanage people. Because when you kind of gave the example of a high ROI person as somebody who's the best at collecting relationships, that just made me be like, oh my goodness, it's so smart to call that out, because so many dealers let people come and go, more importantly, go, that were these really, really, really valuable talent pieces. And it's so much more difficult to find the talent. You can find a warm body and maybe tune them up enough in hourly wage or whatever, however you're going to compensate them to maybe get them to come in and disappoint you as an employee. But when you have found the most valuable people, I thought you were just absolutely straight in the middle of the bullseye, and I never hear people talk about that. So,
well, I think I really was inspired by the OG car salespeople, honestly, like in defense of the car dog, that's what I should have called it. But I really do think that, I came in right kind of as we were transitioning. I wasn't part of like the first group. I mean, we know a lot of these guys, like the Paglias, RIP, Cooper, all those guys that, right, like in the very beginning, like CompuServe and stuff like that. But then they were kind of like right there after that. But I mean, we still knew enough people where there's people that just hung out at the country club, and they hung out at the Lions Club or the Eagles or any like, organizations, like they're part of the community fabric, and they didn't have to work a CRM. Again, it's sort of a defense of situation, because like that was their job description, is to build relationships and to have customers call them directly and like essentially build their own book of business, much unlike a lot of other kind of old sales businesses were. And I think that was sort of over time just sort of supplanted by, now you have to do this, and now you have to do this, and now you have to do this, and if you use a CRM, and you use this thing, click this button, send these, like use these templates, call people 4 or 5 times a day at these times, like click this thing, whatever. And I look at that and I go, man, it's no wonder why people are like, I'm out. This is what I signed up for. I think it's different than a typical retail position where it's like, okay, here's your cash register. You swipe in, you push this, but you know what I mean? Like they don't have the opportunity to not do it, and they don't have any previous experience being successful not doing it. We're talking about a cohort of people that make 6-figure salaries and have for years, raised their kids, sent them to college, bought a boat, bought a Harley, bought a vacation house. They did all that stuff prior to having to click a stupid computer button to them, and we have to like, now you have to do this. So, and again, it's not saying it's okay that they don't do those things. But what I'm saying though is like, it's hard to sort of have that expectation of them because they've gone their whole life not needing to do it. Yeah. And they could still be successful not doing it. We're not talking about like quit smoking or quit eating, carbohydrates or something silly like that. Like, right. It literally like this is their life. And so, that is one of the things that really bothers me because, again, we're going to just these are your new responsibilities. Keep doing your old job and do this new stuff and learn it. Otherwise you're going to get fired or whatever, or we're just going to keep yelling at you. And in all likelihood, they just kind of let it go and just kind of brush it under the carpet and then point at somebody else who makes mistakes. You know what I mean? But like, but in all reality, I think if you were to take, a lot of these new technologies and automations and things that, you and I were talking about before we started recording, if you take a lot of those things and put them into that sort of quote unquote busy work environment and then just allow people to be the best version of themselves, they'd be a lot more productive. And there's a lot of things all the things that click. And so it's almost like the hatch and Lost for the people in the audience who watch that, but you're just like clicking on the buttons to get the thing to stop.
Yeah.
And then the timer just runs. And I feel like for a lot of people that it's like their job. It's like I gotta go left LVM, 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 LVM. Okay, done with those tasks. On to calling my customers I care about. And that plays out at 8:57 local time all across the continent every single day of the week.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean about that division of labor, of just understanding like, hey, like these are the things you're good at. Let's make you really good at those things. These are things that you're not interested in. It's not you're not good at it. You're just not interested in it. Like, let's find that person who's really excited about that part. Have them do that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's an author, Marcus Buckingham, that wrote First Break All the Rules. And then he wrote another one that like around kind of Strengths Finder. And he basically is kind of advocating to people, stop doing all the things that you hate and that you're not good at. Just stop doing them.
Yeah.
And at first it's kind of one of those, well, you can't just stop like everything. You got to clean your room. Like you got to, but the greater point, the macro point in all of it is pretty interesting. And it parallels a lot of what you're sharing. So for people that are like, hey, that could be an adjacent learning resource. Marcus Buckingham has written a couple of really
I'd
cool
like to share a book
that.
I'm reading right now by Charles Duhigg called Super Communicators. It just came out, but it actually, you made me think about it because it's talking about these sort of innate skills that people have that can communicate with everybody. And just as the title makes it sound like, but I think about when we hire people for certain roles, and how often have you, in your experience, ran into like that mousy, quiet person inside of a call center? And we're expecting to be this gregarious, excitable person and get enthusiastic about. And it's like, listen, we're asking them to do something that's really uncomfortable. You know what I mean, for them. And like, we don't serve them by hiring them, honestly.
No. And it's funny because this kind of stuff comes up in my conversations more often than it ever used to 10 and certainly 20 years ago. And that is, how much do you really know about a person from like personality profiling, DISC, Myers-Briggs? There's overly simplified versions as well that you can learn a lot from. And most organizations don't know enough about somebody to know if they're like off the chart conscientious or off the chart very friendly. How was your weekend? Or off the chart, I don't really care about your weekend. Just give me I need the information right now. I don't want small talk. Like, let's move on. And I know enough about myself because I've done enough of those that I am sure I exhaust a lot of people because I'm not very good with brevity. I say a lot. I have a lot to share, I suppose. But when I think about, organizations employing those strategies and tactics, it would save them so much time, because if they know that their highest performers, like you're talking about the ROI of your people, your highest performances in this job role all fit these primary personality categories, guess what? You're not putting in there the people that don't have those characteristics.
Yeah. So there's a study done a few years ago, and I'm not going to quote the number because I don't want to butcher it. But Cox did a study. I think it was in conjunction with Hierology. Anybody's welcome to Google anything I talk about. But the amount of money the average dealership spent hiring, training, and firing, absolutely terrifying how much money. Like, it literally would pay for like another full-time person to work there for a whole year.
Yeah.
It's astonishing what gets invested. And what makes me want to throw up is the fact that companies pay guys like you and me to come in, train these people up, get them good, and they go on the road. And now they're the competition. And one of our clients actually they lost several of their team to a local dealership that's just, maybe 45 minutes away. And several people just kind of migrated that direction. And it's like, man, that sucks, because I don't care who you are. It's a lot of money that you're investing in these people, whether you're doing the training and then you're monetizing, taking your own time into consideration, or you're bringing somebody in from the outside, or a whole chorus of people from the outside. But all that just adds up when if you had just hired the right person, but I think more importantly, it had like leveled expectations about what they're supposed to do. So we're not, it's one thing to stretch and grow people, but it's a whole different thing to make somebody who's an introvert into like some kind of, wild stand-up comedian extrovert.
Yes.
And
Yes.
sometimes that's what it takes to do, and it's like, you can only take them so far.
Yeah.
God bless you for trying, but a lot of times it just ends in sort of disappointment. It's like, man, I wish I had just not hired that person in the first place. Well, you probably shouldn't.
You're making too much sense. I've told a lot of dealers when it got, this whole internet customer that we've been dealing with for nearly 30 years.
Right.
I wish I had a $5 for every time I told a dealer, don't get it wrong. You hired salespeople, not English majors. So when you're asking them to show off their written communication skills, and you're disappointed that they can't punctuate, they misspell words, or it's just horrible. Like, why would you ever send this to anyone that you wanted to give a professional communication to? They're not English majors. So, and that kind of speaks back a little bit to your value of, if you've got a well-oiled BDC, then you got a lot more control over consistency and making sure things are efficient. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, another pivot. So to the audience, I'm pivoting now a little bit on training. So I'll also tell you to look up Bill's multi-part, 3-part series around training, because in this case, Bill has a lot of insights when you consider traditional training and it feels like punishment. I think you talk about, which is so true. It doesn't feel particularly inclusive. It doesn't feel like it empowers anybody. I want to get into that a little bit. And the first thing is, like, share a little bit on like this myth that there's most training is kind of one size fits all. Like the best practice is like one size fits all. That
Shaun,
just seems
how do we do this to the audience? We don't have a lot of time. But and I'm still working on that, by the way. And apologies to anybody who has. I've got like another like 1,400 words I've written down that I haven't like edited. Like I literally sat down and like wrote like 4,800 words when I started this thing. I just like didn't stop just pouring out of me from the the quantum realm or something. But the whole kind of impetus behind this really is people who are receiving the training don't choose the training, and they're not part of that equation. They're not part of those things, and there's so many facets of how they're thrust into that environment that need to be broken apart, because it's not so much the fact that they don't choose it or aren't part of that decision making process, or sort of simpatico with that trainer, but there's other things too, like we're not measuring it properly. People aren't really clearly in charge of it, and I look at that and I go, man, like, how do we control those outcomes? And a lot of this stuff is sort of from studying organizational development and other industries, and it really is something where people are almost destined to fail on the regular, because even if they have a couple of those different things that are involved, oftentimes they can't get there, and or they're being held to a standard that's so just infinitesimally impossible to get to, that they still fail, even though like they're being successful and they're growing and they're retaining people and they're making more money and they're doing all these good things, but because they've been presented this goal that's just so inflated that they still are being held accountable to something that they can't get to. And it's those things I see on repeat over and over and over again. And so I really want to take the time to, and again, apologies to anybody who's been reading that, and I kind of left one off on metrics, because that's one of my things that like I've been very involved with since day one in this business, and not having standards and things of that nature. But there's so much that happens in terms of I feel like, and I still hear that today. And I want to say that it's not just BD agents or salespeople who need to open a book from time to time. Like there's a lot of managers and leadership team members that also need to look at that stuff and go, hey, like some of the stuff that we're measuring against isn't realistic, or it's just not accurate.
Yeah.
I'll be the best example. And like this was one that was used in business school to demonstrate things, but it was beach ball sales. And it was like, in the summer, lots of beach balls get sold because that's when most of America goes to the beach. But in the winter, a lot of beach balls aren't sold because not a lot of people are going to the beach. And yeah, there are pockets of people that have access to the beach on the regular, but on the whole, beach balls get sold during the summer. And if we look at this, and I've tested this thousands of times now, we can go and see those cyclics inside of any dealership where, there are highs and lows or natural times depending where they're at, what they sell, or what price point they're at, what the demographics are. But you can take all those things into account and you can see there are natural sort of peaks and valleys that happen. And they're there all the time. And it's like the dealership goes out of business in February. They just have to brace themselves for those times. Just like, people who are working for themselves or a contractor or own their own business, like it goes like this, and we just don't max out our Amex card all the time. We need a buffer. But it's just stuff like that where people get given these arbitrary targets to hit, or, hey, we were at this point last month. We're going to hit this point this month.
Mm-hmm.
And the classic example, I think most of the audience would understand, whether they're inside a dealership or not, it's sort of like the January or the December to January transition. That's a classic example. Well, of course you're going to be kicking ass in December because they have all the incentives, and historically speaking, that's when all the closeouts are and all the great deals. And everyone wants to finish strong, get those shareholders stoked about the results in Q4. And then January, nothing happens. There's no incentives, and there's all those things go away. And it happens every year. And I think that's a prime example of the cyclics and why you shouldn't look at month over month as a good indicator in terms of, performance in a lot of respects.
Yeah.
So
great
stuff like
point.
that, or, just using like sales as the only thing we compare anything to, and like we don't, it just seems to be like that is like the prime metric for how we measure the success of something.
Mm-hmm. So true.
It's like, again, those ebb and flow, and they should, but like just even the fact that we don't even use things as sort of like a percentage of, or a factor of, or anything, like it's not that sales aren't important, because sales, they happen, they're great, they're objective, because a car goes across the curb, gets registered with the state, it happened, it's sold. That's something we can actually observe and say, yeah, that is something empirical. But to say that like the CRM is going to sell you more cars, or the marketing campaigns are going to sell more cars, or referral campaigns or mailers or any of those things, like, no, you really can't do that, because there's two other things that are going on, and it goes back to that 2% like we talked about. And so just things of that nature that we really need to start to take a harder look at closing ratio, that, these sort of like universal metrics, like they're not always the most accurate indicators of performance or improvement, or if things are going on a positive trajectory or negative trajectory. There's got to be other ways that we can look at these things to understand how effective our training is, or any strategy we're trying to implement. There's got to be a better way to do that, in a way that we can say like, okay, I agree with this, Shaun agrees with this, Bob, Michelle, Jenny, if anybody looks at this and they go, hey, this is good, like that's a good result.
These are all really good points to make sure that there's objectivity and in the discussion and what people are thinking about, because a lot of times, dealers, I feel bad for dealers in the last, just the technology wave that's affected the retail side of our industry for dealers, has forced expectations that are completely unrealistic. And it's like, oh, you need to be a computer whiz. You need to understand, like you were just alluding to some of these things that have complicated the business for dealers, and nobody ever really talks about like the level of complexity has multiplied. I don't even know if anybody could really make a good guess on it, because all these technologies are fantastic, but this is still a people business and a communications and a relationship business with people. And all of a sudden, in the process of trying to figure all these things out, and I've got to know how to do this and that and the other, you're heavily over-indexing on things that don't even matter. And when talking about training, last thing, and this may be, you can take as long as you want on this answer before I get to a little bit of this or that to kind of take us to a bit of the close or get closer, but also on training. I love that you shared, and again, audience, we're just scratching the surface on both of these primary topics. Definitely go and reread these articles or read them for the first time. But you give an example of a couple of things. One, I liked your metaphor, I think NFL Combine. But you talk about the context of comparison. You talk about some cities. You reference that, and you tie it into me. I felt like it was really important when you're helping people become a bit more self-aware. When you're comparing yourself against, well, what peer group? You're comparing yourself against, well, what should it be? And I think ultimately you're making the point that you should be comparing yourself first and foremost to yourself. And that's that's the last thing that I just want to get your kind of open-ended thoughts on around that context relative to comparison, what that means for people, because I think that's a real strong thing for people to hear from you on.
The answer is yes. No, but the whole but the reason why I think that's the best way to measure anything to start with is honestly, like, I think every dealership, and a lot of people we know, and you and I both work with hundreds, if not thousands of different dealerships in some capacity, and not talking about just selling stuff in there, but I'm talking about actually, like, getting our hands dirty and meeting people and ruffling feathers. And it's a matter of, like, understanding, like, there are so many other variables outside of just sales, kind of going back to that are factors in how a dealership's going to perform or what they can expect. And I always kind of the classic example I like to use is sort of like, I could challenge LeBron James in a game of horse, you know what I mean? And I can will myself into it, and I can fake it until I make it, and I can make a bunch of YouTube videos about it and post on Facebook and all these great aphorisms around that. The bottom line is that LeBron James should mop the floor with me, even if LeBron James was like a decrepit, beat up old man. He would destroy me in basketball because he's like a genetic mutant. Like, he literally is like, the stars aligned properly, and like Odin blessed him or something. I don't know, but he's shaving in 4th grade, whatever. But like, he's a physical specimen that is a tuned athlete that can play basketball, and he has all those things. It's not enough to be tall or to be athletically gifted, but having the sense and the longevity and the health and the way he's maintained himself. And listen, I'm a Michael Jordan fan to like die. He's my number one, right? But a guy like LeBron is a good example, because like, no matter how hard the average person works, they're not going to be able to do that. And listen, you could put any dude in the NBA. You know what I mean? There's a handful of people that have a snowball's chance in hell of beating that guy in horse.
Right.
And so it's like a matter of like, let's think about something realistic. Well, I'm 6 foot tall. I'm not athletically gifted. I'm about 215 pounds of dad bod. And I should probably work on my own game first. And when I become the best version of me, when I'm, a little less dad bod and a little more athletic, and as much as a 46-year-old, Caucasian man who has got 4 kids and living in a, mildly urban area can do, where like you start to factor all those things in there. I can't go outside and practice all year long because it's cold. You start to factor all those other variables in there, and then like I can get to a certain level. Or anybody can get to a certain level, but you should get to that level first. And I think most stores, when they do these things, they want to change a bunch of stuff all at the same time. First off, it's like, we're going to do fire agency, get a new CRM, talk about new DMS, get 2 new sales managers in here. We're going to flood the floor with a bunch of salespeople. We're going to do all these things at once. Well, first, assuming you can do all those things, how do you know any one of those things actually was a factor? That's the thing. You can't really say, okay, it was that one thing. Now everybody will say, hey, it was me, or it was this. But the bottom line is, I should say can't, but it's really hard to logically conclude that was it, or if it wasn't just the August sale where they had 84%, 0% financing, or 84-month, whatever, like, those early days of COVID deals. So we have to look at ourselves and go, hey, we've addressed all these variables. We've looked at our team. This is the best team we can put together. Everybody is firing all cylinders. Everybody's kind of plateaued at this certain level. Now let's take a look and see how we compare. And I think a lot of stores, and maybe I'm wildly biased because I deal with a lot of these dealers on the regular, but I see it happen all the time. I read the same articles and watch the same videos and see all the same Facebook posts everybody else does. And I look at this stuff and go, man, this is just a flash in the pan. They don't have everything locked in. And more importantly, they're going after a goal that's not really realistic. So just to further expand on it, because you told me I could take as much time as I want to. A lot of dealerships are, through their OEM, you've been compared in the same zone. And it really stinks when you are a smaller dealership and you're doing your best and you're kicking ass, you're investing tons of money in your business, and you got great people and you got super awesome inventory, but you have 10,000 people in your town, and the people down the road have 40,000. People down the road from them got about 280,000. Like, to be compared against those dealerships isn't fair when you're only looking at sales, because you just don't have the people to sell to. And you can pump in, you can do all these fun things and have lookalike audiences and things I did, things you did when we were selling cars, but you can't expect to get to that same level. For example, my first dealership I worked at was a really tiny Ford store, and 8,000 people in the town. Like, there's maybe 40,000 in the county, and our dealers in our zone were in Dearborn, where they make the effing things. You know what I mean? And so, like, they're doing more money in A-plan business a day than we're doing in a month, and that's because they have, not only is it a much, much larger town in a major metro area, but then they also have generations of Ford employees or retirees and suppliers that are all right there on top of it. And we'd never get to those numbers. But yet we're still compared. We're still in the same zone. Well, you guys are right at the bottom. Well, yeah, because we're doing our best, but it's not enough because we are completely hamstrung by the competition. Now, hey, why don't you compare us to other really small rural market dealerships that are like us, and then see how we compare? And we did, and we realized, hey, like, we annihilated the competition. The dealership I was at for the longest, same 8,000 people, we did quadruple what our suggested retail amount was every single month. So we got all the cool trophies in the middle of Cornfield County, but we had a system, we had a plan. But even with that, we still could compete with the dealerships that had 1,100 new cars on their lot, because they did. That's true. That happened at the time. So, we treated their lot like our lot. We just used their inventory to sell. So we did some fun stuff back then. But I just feel like everybody really needs to do themselves a favor and stop looking at this shit on social media. And I'll say that, like, you don't have to compare those people. When you can say, like, hey, I'm the best version of me, I'm doing all the things I should be doing, and you can look in the mirror and say that, then go for it. But I feel like there's plenty of people that we know have come and gone over the years. There's plenty of people on the fringe that kind of disappear, that aren't the best version of themselves. I'm not the best version of me. I'm not. Like, there's still plenty of room for me to grow.
I think that's one of the keys to, I don't, maybe long life, but certainly longevity, I think, is always feeling like I'm a work in progress all the time. I'm learning and, I'm trying to grow. And these are all, I don't know if we'll be able to pull all the gold out of the ground of this episode. There's just so much really, really good stuff.
Well, I think that if anybody takes that part away, like, there's no need to drown your sorrows trying to compare yourself to the Facebook version of somebody. Because that is the curated story they want you to hear. I've definitely got to pull the cover off these digital dealer profiles and stuff like that. Look at the CRM, look at the DMS, and go like, "There's some bullshit there,"
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
is it is, and people, and I don't blame people for wanting to do that, but at the same time, I know a lot of people have literally like impacted their health. They worked so hard. They got really depressed. They've gotten substance abuse issues for it because they're not able to somehow compare to some people. Don't do that.
So true. Great advice. Okay, so last couple of things as we are approaching the landing of this episode. This or that, not quite, but almost 20 questions. I just want your answer as fast as possible. And whatever comes out. This is just for fun. So, are you ready?
I think so. Okay.
They start really easy, and then the last couple of them, you might have to think about them. So,
is there anything political I need to be forewarned about?
No, nothing political. No, that would be a completely different podcast. Like, these are all pretty easy. Okay, so hot dog or corn dog?
I'm gonna go with hot dog.
Okay, burger or pizza?
Pizza.
Ice cream or cake?
Ice cream.
Raiders of the Lost Ark or Star Wars?
Star Wars.
Legends of the Fall or Fight Club?
Fight Club.
Superman or Batman? I know.
Taking out the fact that Superman could just like flick Batman like and rip him in half, I'm gonna still say Batman. Just the rage factor.
I know, and also, that human, real human element. I love that. Okay, Metallica or Megadeth?
See, these are getting hard. These are not meatball questions. Okay, like I gotta go with Metallica. I think that's a tough one though. Depends on the day.
Okay,
Dave Menza,
Eddie or Eddie or Jimmy, and that would be Van Halen and Hendrix.
I knew you were talking about Jimmy. He's the GOAT all day.
Okay, air guitar or air drums?
I'm an air drummer.
Okay, test the waters or jump into the deep?
I'm a water tester.
Pineapple on your pizza or candy corn?
Well, you'd be a monster if you had candy corn on your pizza, so pineapple.
Okay. Crunchy peanut butter or creamy peanut butter?
I'm a smooth jazz kind of peanut butter guy.
Okay. All right. I like that answer. Night owl or early bird gets the worm?
I'd probably say I'm a night owl, even though I'm not much of a sleeper in kind of person.
Yep. Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad?
Ooh. I'd say Breaking Bad, actually.
Okay. In the city or out in the country?
I'm a country boy.
Ambition or comfort?
Dude, that's like pink and like orange. I mean, like,
it's terrible. I'm a terrible host.
I have a hard time shutting off, so I'd have to say ambition. I hate vacations. I do. Yeah. Anybody knows me will tell you the same thing.
Messy desk or clean desk?
For as much as I wish I had a clean desk, it's an absolute shithole on my desk right now. So messy desk, just for honest.
Okay, last two, but you might think a little more. Like, see the future or change the past?
I'd rather see the future.
Okay. And save 100 strangers or one person you actually love?
Either great or good. You gotta stick with it. Sorry, person I love.
Yeah. You'd save the 100 strangers? Yeah. I love and hate that question. I love it.
Well, it's a classic psychology question. And ethics.
It is.
In the classroom all the time.
It is. And it's, in all honesty, and I've shared this with a few people that I've talked to this question about. Not all have been interviewed and recorded when I ask it, but talking about the question, it also has it's changed a lot for people over the last handful of years.
Mhm.
There's just the nastier society gets, it's very difficult to get in that. And I told somebody that I said, I think for most of my life, and right now, I think my answer to that question probably changes by the day. Because in some cases, I always feel like I'm the person, I'm going to try to save them, as many people. And then, some of the personal losses that I've had in my family, both my parents, but others in my family too, they just, once those start to pile up later in life, and then you think about the contrast of other people in society, you're like, gosh, man, you so would want to save one of them. It's a mind bending question. And
Yeah. Well, we know somebody that would say like, well, what if it was like 100 pedophiles? What if it was like 100 murderers? What if it was like 100? You know what I mean? Like,
right,
and like,
right.
You can't ever answer those questions. But
I know.
I certainly would try to like, not to sound too soft, but I would try to sacrifice myself to save that person. I think so.
Yeah.
But that's also not part of the question.
I know. I can see it. It's one of those things where I kind of like to talk about it, because to me, it's also one of those things that you can help find the middle in really, really big dilemmas. Like, I think there's still a unifying current around almost all things, and we let so much of the other stuff in life, be it politics, entertainment, superstars, whatever. You just were actually mentioning a big part of it. Social media ends up having such a influence, indirect and directly, on things that really we need to keep out of our personal relationships, because they end up being so much more damaging. Last thing I want to ask you about again is, where can people get summer camp info? Where should they go? What else do they need to know? What do they definitely not need to miss out on? Promo that summer camp, including any URLs or where people need to go to get information.
If you just go to dealerknows.com, there's a giant button that would take you right there. But what I would like to do is, if people want to reach out to me directly, Bill at Dealer Knows, I would love to offer up a discounted tickets to your audience. Okay. So if you want to just reach out to me directly, they can do that. Or in post, as they say, we can throw up a code and I can actually get a discount for those people that want to register directly.
So if you're comfortable with me throwing your email address up we'll just slap it on the episode here at the end. And
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing is, like, for dealers, the only thing that I have to say about our conference is it's small on purpose. One, being in a rural area, there's not an overabundance of JW Marriott's and Ritz Carlton's to stay at, and these other hotels that dealers are used to staying at with their 20 groups. Yeah. But there's a lot of motels like that. But I mean, there just isn't a lot of lodging, so it's going to be smaller, both by design and by just by utilities. So we are limiting the discounts and stuff to dealers, and trying to get as many people from the dealer community as we can. But that said, like, we definitely want this to be the type of place where people from the vendor community, people from the OEM community, people from the tier one agency level, and there will be people there like that. We want this to be a type of place where everybody's got a voice, and that's something that we're really passionate about, and that's something that we really found that last year that added a tremendous amount of value, and we feel like that not to prattle on about this, but we just feel like that's a missing element in the conference experience anymore. It's just sort of everybody getting a say and everybody being able to reach an agreement and be part of those decisions. And we really want to keep that going. And so we definitely want to get more dealers there. But if you're part of the broader automotive ecosystem, like, by all means reach out. I'm sure there's a way that we can get you there as well.
Awesome. Well, you heard it across the whole industry. It's kind of everybody's invited, and what you should expect is the same. Sounds like at least a similar thought process around, old school 20 groups. The reason why there's a control there is not just so that you're not sharing things in the same market as your competitors, but it's also because learning environments oftentimes are much richer when you have a better control of the number of people. And that becomes a very, very big issue with large conferences. It's dealers never really want to admit it, but it just trying to attend one event can be overwhelming because they're trying to map their issues, the pain points that they're experiencing, to the people that they need to go and listen to. So I like that approach. If you get a chance, get out to summer camp. Sounds like a place where you're going to make some connections and have relationships with people that you'll be glad that you have established. So that's awesome. And I will. Last word. Anything? Last word to the guest.
This is always fun. It's always good to talk to you, and I always appreciate the fact you and I can just pick up right where you left off. But like I said, I'm optimistic. You know what I mean? It's one of these things. I think there will be a dealership. There's probably 4 or 5 dealerships today that are already doing some of the things that we're talking about right now, and I'm optimistic that they'll start to become the benchmark. People start to look at them and go, you know what? We're not cared about chasing numbers, but we want to be more profitable. We want more efficient. We want to keep our people. We want to keep that our investment alive. We want it all to pay off. We want those customers that we brought in from our competitors to stick with us, and all those things. And I feel like there are dealerships doing that right now, and I just can't wait for them to come to the forefront. I can't wait for a day where private equity comes and invests in a dealer, and not some startup or some .com or some Silicon Valley Y Combinator alums or whatever to try to disrupting this business. I just think it takes people kind of eating the shit sandwich, so to speak, in an academic way. Best person you can think for it, but really do the hard stuff and work through it. Be patient, and really work on your leadership and work on all your people. And I think when that happens, that critical mass will be right there. And I think we'll get to see the best parts of the dealer community in the next 20 years. We've already seen the worst parts of it, but I think we've yet to see the best parts of it. And I think that's just right on the horizon. And I think it takes a Tesla, it takes a Rivian, it takes these disruptors to be out there doing their thing. But so be it. It gets it out there. And I'm really excited to see what my next 20 years in this business looks like.
I love the hope. I love the optimism. You're definitely one of the most critical thinkers in our industry. It's always so easy to talk to you. I get inspired. It makes me think of things. I'm like things I want to follow up on and things that I want to be a good advocate for. Because there are a lot of the things that are actually more important than a lot of the noise in the industry that need a lot more attention. And I am always so happy that you share that. So again, to the audience, make sure you go and consume all of the stuff that Bill writes. So over on his LinkedIn, it's all worth it. Go back and read all that stuff. And now you know what's going on with Bill Playford.